I've been so excited for this morning and for what is about to happen. So for the past month, we've spent our Sundays experiencing some of our core practices here at Salt House, the things that have bubbled up about who we are as we've lived into who we are in the last 2 years and 10 months of our existence. And I want to just review quickly some of what that has looked like. So some of these core practices that we've named and lived through are being changed. So transition and naming that that's just a reality of life, and particularly the life of Jesus. That's something that we've named as central to who we are, as well as our core practice of engaging in the needs of homelessness here on the east side, particularly through the New Bethlehem Day Center and eventually the permanent shelter. So we had a volunteer orientation on a Sunday morning this last month too, just to say this is central to who we are. We've talked about our core practice of food, of eating together, that is vital. Always having Holy Communion is a part of what happens here, engaging in this sacred mystery that we're a part of, but also eating together twice a month after worship. And also challenging each other to be gathering at tables during the week too, so that little 3-meal challenge of eating, having coffee, having a beer with folks throughout our week as well, because good and sacred things happen when we eat together. Also our core practice of generosity, how we were birthed out of the incredible generosity that was given from Trinity Lutheran Church that used to be here. So we also want to live into that story and give where we want our hearts to go. Also our core practice of hearing God, how we listen intentionally here, but also throughout our days and our lives. And so we live with these two questions of what is God saying to me and what am I going to do about it? Also, what is God saying to us and what are we going to do about it? And today we close this journey we've been on for this last month plus of core practices for now, as we move into the season of Lent that will begin on this Wednesday, Ash Wednesday. Who's never been to an Ash Wednesday service? Folks, never been? Yeah. Yeah, so it's a thing, and that's cool, yeah. I would invite you to come. It's, who doesn't want to talk about death, particularly on Valentine's Day? I think that alone is a reason to be there. So hopefully be here or don't, but hopefully you'll come. It'll be a meaningful time to frame the season of Lent as we begin that journey together. But before we get there, there's today. This morning we are celebrating 2 more of our core practices. The first is something that we say every Sunday morning, and Jason had us read it this morning. It's printed in our bulletin. It's actually on our reader board this week as well. It is our practice of radical welcome. And it boils down to the fact that Jesus welcomes and affirms all people, and so we sure try to do that too. And we'll hear this morning one story then of how there is room for folks of all kinds of perspectives and colors and creeds and backgrounds and beliefs here in this space, and that we are made better in a community when there is diversity here. So that's just part of who we are. The second core practice that we are actively putting into practice this morning is the practice that stories matter. Stories matter. Our stories matter. Both sides of storytelling. So making room and curiosity in ourselves to hear someone else's story, but also having the courage to share our own story and show up here in community as well. For when stories are shared, that distance between us gets a little smaller, right? As we see in the stories, as we hear in the stories, those shimmers of connections. And when stories are shared, we also get to hear God's stories in our stories, right? So I'm also making the commitment to do more of that here on Sunday mornings, making room moving forward. We've done this throughout the last 2 years and 9 and 10 months, but we want to do more of that, so that's a commitment I'm making. We'll call them Salt House Stories. I know, really original name. But just making room to tell those stories. So if you have part of your story that you want to share with this community, please let me know. So today's Salt House story is Gila's story. So Gila and her wife Heather, they are an active part of our community. They've been hosting the book study this season that we're having. They're coordinating our monthly dinner that we serve at the New Bethlehem Day Center. Gila is a psychotherapist here in Kirkland. She's a mom to adult children. She's a wife. She's a beloved child of God. And there's so much more to Gila, some of which we get to hear today too, so which is great. I want to check in. Is my microphone? Okay, cool. There's like all this going on. I just wanted to... I know, woohoo! Awesome. I have a new microphone. I don't know if you noticed that, but I'm like super excited about that too. So, a little, hi. Okay, but back to Gila. So to set us up to hear Gila's story, we're going to hear two stories. First is turning to Scripture. So the first story is from the Hebrew Scriptures, the Old Testament, Genesis 32. It's a moment in the life of Jacob. You may remember that Jacob, if you know the story, he stole his brother Esau's blessing by tricking their father Isaac when they were kids. So that had happened years ago. Jacob fled to keep his brother Esau from killing him. And Jacob, so now, the moment that we're in now, Jacob has just received word that Esau is coming to see him with 400 of his men. So Jacob is terrified. He prays to God. He then splits his own men into two groups. He's like, if one gets attacked, then maybe some of them can escape in time. And he sends servants ahead of him to meet Esau with hundreds of goats, sheep, ram, camels, cows, bulls, and donkeys to offer as gifts, like saying, okay, here you go, trying to soften Esau up. Hopefully with all these gifts coming at him to receive then Jacob without, killing him. So that's all happening. He sends the gifts. They're on the way. Jacob settles into camp to sleep, but he's restless. He wakes up. He sends his wives and children and all his possessions across the river to a safer place, just feeling better about that. But he stays behind alone. And then this is what happens. So we're going to hold this story alongside what Gila will share with us and alongside our own stories too. So I'm going to invite Heather up. Gila's wife Heather is going to read it for us this morning.
But Jacob stayed behind by himself, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he couldn't get the best of Jacob as they wrestled, he deliberately threw Jacob's hip out of joint. The man said, "Let me go, it's daybreak." Jacob said, "I'm not letting you go till you bless me." The man said, "What's your name?" He answered, "Jacob." The man said, "But no longer. Your name is no longer Jacob. From now on, it's Israel, God wrestler. You've wrestled with God and you've come through." Jacob asked, "What's your name?" The man said, "Why do you want to know my name?" And then, right then and there, he blessed him. Jacob named the place Peniel, God's face, because, he said, "I saw God face to face and lived to tell the story." The sun came up as he left Peniel, limping because of his hip. This is why Israelites to this day don't eat the hip muscle, because Jacob's hip was thrown out of joint.
Second story Gila has asked us to hold as well. She's going to reference this too, but it's a story. It's going to be the audio of a podcast called On Being with Krista Tippett. Perhaps you're familiar. I love that podcast. It's part of a story by Amy Bender, and it's read by Ellen Burstyn. It's the story of a rabbi and a doctor. The rabbi is a woman. The doctor is a man. And this is the dialogue that they share. So we'll listen to the audio. It's a few minutes long. Then as it ends, Gila will come on up and share with us.
The doctor went to see the rabbi. "Tell me, Rabbi, please," he said, "about God." The rabbi pulled out some books. She talked about Jacob wrestling the angel. She talked about Heschel and the kernel of wonder as a seedling that could grow into awe. She tugged at her braid and told a Hasidic story about how it is said that at the end of your life, you will need to apologize to God for the ways you have not lived. Not for the usual sins, she said, for the sin of living small. A few months later, the rabbi became sick. She had a disease of the blood, a disease that needed weekly transfusions that she scheduled on Wednesdays so she would be at her best for Shabbat. The doctor who had come to see her was a doctor of blood, a transfusionist. She thought of him as she sat with her husband staring at their enfolded hands, wondering what to do. "That man," she said, looking up, "that man who came by a few months ago." When the rabbi was in her paper gown, she looked smaller, of the earth, and the doctor did not mind the role reversal. "I'm so sorry you have to go through this," he said. The rabbi lay down on the cold table. She offered her arm. The blood drained from her. The blood of another person filled her. The doctor stood beside her and reset the instruments in a line. The rabbi came for many transfusions, and she recovered at a brisk pace, filled with the blood of Hindus and Lutherans. The treatments went so well she didn't have to visit as often anymore, and the doctor missed seeing her at the clinic. After a month had gone by, he went to her office again, where he found her talking to another rabbi, massaging the bottom of a stocking foot. She hugged him and pressed his hand and thanked him, and he said he would like to talk to her again. About God, she asked. I'm not sure, he said. I don't think so. They went to a coffee shop because she could now go no longer than 2 hours without food. I gave you the blood of other religions, he blurted. She laughed out loud, lifting out the croissant. No problem, she said. I like what you gave me. It's great. And how did you know? There's a box on the donation form, he said, an optional box. How interesting that it's a box on a form, she said, chewing. I've never heard of that before. So who did I get? She asked, now dipping the croissant torso. His hands were shaking slightly. He put them flat on the table to calm them. He wasn't sure why he was so nervous around her. Christians, he said, of all sorts, including a Jehovah's Witness, several Muslims, a few Jews. Well, maybe it's a new route to world peace, she said. Transfuse people. And atheists, he said tentatively. What about them? I gave you atheist blood too, he said. He cringed visibly. She laughed again, all that warmth in her laugh, like it could embrace someone across the room. I don't hate atheists, she said. I'm an atheist, he said, a little too loud. And he reached out for her hand. For a second, she held his. His hand was much wider than hers, and her hands, not usually considered dainty, looked small and slender next to his. I'm not here to push anything on you, she said. Lots of Jews I know are atheist Jews. Your eyes shine, he said. How do they do that? Blood, she said.
Hello. Hello. I like that story. The reason I share this story with you is because I like the dance between the doctor who identifies himself as an atheist and the rabbi, a believer, a woman of God. And I like the image of the blood. Blood has been a central image in both Christianity and Judaism, but in very different ways. In Judaism, blood is what determines if you're a Jew. In Christianity, the ritual of drinking wine is transformed as a central image of Jesus' blood in a way to belong to him, to show up as a Christian, and perhaps on another level to enter a way of being with God. It's also one of my first challenges in coming to Salt House because I'm a Jew. But I'm a little weepy too, so that's going to probably happen throughout this whole talk. But I'm a different kind of Jew. I'm a convert. I didn't grow up with Jewish blood running through my body. I grew up in a Christian home and then converted as an adult. It was my wife Heather's idea to come to Salt House. We'd been looking for a way to feel more connected to the local community that we live in, and she saw the flyer for the new day center for homeless families that was going in the Salt House basement, and she said, "Hey, we ought to go." She's got a real passion for the homeless community and So she thought it might line up with some of our values. But given our history, we each brought our own complicated feelings with us about attending a Christian church. I felt a bit of dread when she suggested we attend services because I knew it would bring up some challenges for me. But I also had made a commitment to myself that I wanted to talk with people who had different beliefs than me in an effort to feel like I was doing something positive to expand my tolerance and compassion for difference, especially in the new political climate we were in. I believe strongly in the power of dialogue as a tool for healing. So we came here, and we liked it, and I like it here. But it was a little awkward when it came time for communion. I struggled. I didn't feel comfortable participating. I wondered if I would be taking sides. I worried I would offend people at church if they knew I was Jewish. I would be disrespecting their sacrament. And I worried I would offend Jews, and specifically my own attachment to Judaism. How could I participate in the Christian sacrament now that I know how it feels to walk as a Jew in a Christian country, holding the complicated story between Jews and Christians as I now know it? There has been so much damage done to Jews in the name of Christianity. And that awareness is very much a part of me now. So I called my rabbi, and I talked with Pastor Sara, and I decided to participate, to see how it felt and what meaning it might have for me, sharing a sacred practice and community with the intention of bringing us closer to God. So when Sara asked me to share my story, and I said yes, I didn't realize how much energy would come up for me to wrestle with. She suggested I might talk about what was scratching at me right now, but I actually think she said what I'm scratching at, but really it feels like it's scratching at me. The first thing that passed through my mind was, gosh, what's really bothering me right now is the absence of Judaism in Christian teaching. So as I sat with this and was trying to come up with words for the feelings that I had, I got this image. I feel a bit like a small child, one who is just coming home to her mother after an extended stay with her beloved grandmother. With light and enthusiasm in the girl's eyes, she says to her mother, "Mom, Mom, Grandma had so many wonderful stories to tell me. Why haven't you told me about them?" And the mother holds up her hand as if to say stop and says, "Those are just old stories. They have no meaning to me." Judaism and Christianity are like family. Christianity, the mother, and Judaism, the grandmother. And their story is complicated. I've been wrestling with that relationship for a long time now. Something I've begun to notice is that I seem to find God in relationship and the wrestling, in the space between me and another, in the eyes of another, in the words of another. When I'm in relationship with words on a page, or when I'm wrestling with a particular piece of scripture, in those places I find God. And I especially like the wrestling, because I know it's a sign that something important is happening. So this is a story of belonging, specifically to community and to family and to myself. I've worried that belonging to one may mean I have to disbelong to the others. I'd like to walk with you through a few of those periods of wrestling in my past and then circle back to today. So as a kid, God scared me. In my younger years, I was raised in the Methodist church. I remember that I liked going. I liked Sunday school. I remember the smell of graham crackers and apple juice and singing in church with the congregation, and how good it felt when everyone was singing the same song. But then when it was time for confirmation, I got scared. At that time, I didn't know about a loving God, but I knew about a judgmental God, and I felt guilty a lot. I was afraid to stand up in front of the congregation and say words that I didn't believe. I didn't know what was true, and I worried that I'd get caught in a lie by God, even in God's house. And I also didn't feel worthy. I wasn't good enough for God, to belong to God in that way. God was the guy you were afraid of and who was watching. You know, you better watch out, you better not cry. Well, I was convinced he knew I wasn't good. In Richard Rohr's book, The Naked Now, he says, God does not love us because we are good. God loves us because God is good. I didn't know that then. So I said no to confirmation and I stopped going to church. And I hoped maybe I wouldn't feel so guilty. Well, as it turned out, I still felt guilty a lot. So that problem didn't get solved like I'd hoped. Fast forward to college and I met a boy just back from his Mormon missionary trip. And he was lit up like a Christmas tree. All that light. He was excited about the experiences he'd had and God and church. He had a different idea of God than me. There were a lot of rules to help you make sense of things. This was good, that was bad, do this, don't do that. Somehow that was very comforting to me. Finally, I know the rules. Surely now I'll know how to be good. I visited the local Mormon church and I was hooked. There was a lot of light there, and people took care of each other, and they liked to study, and they were excited about their faith. I converted and enjoyed about a year of community and learning and friendships, and new ways to experience God. I had some very powerful experiences there that continue to inform my life today. But during that time, I also met a cute Jewish guy who I started dating, and the rules began to feel very restrictive pretty fast. Especially the one that said how you get into heaven. Only if you're baptized in this special way would you make it in. Some were in and some were out. And my Jewish boyfriend was definitely out. I couldn't hold that tension or reconcile it. I felt I had to choose between him or the church. Eventually, I chose him. We got married. It was a good choice. But I struggled with the tension of my newfound spirituality and my connection to God, and my husband's connection to his Jewish culture. I missed having a spiritual community. I wanted to find somewhere that felt as good as the Mormon community did, where people were excited about what they were learning and practicing, and would accept both me and my husband. We were blessed with 3 children. Casey's here today visiting. And we decided to raise our children Jewish, but again, I felt like I had to choose sides. Sort of like I had pictures of his parents and my parents, and whichever one I chose, one was going to pay a price for not getting to hold their grandchildren close and share their culture and their ideas, and it was tough. But it was a good decision. It was important to me that my kids were raised within a spiritual tradition, that they would at least have somewhere to belong or something to push against as adults, even if they didn't carry it forward. They would have a starting place for knowing God. It also occurs to me now that raising our kids Jewish would cause me the least amount of stress at that time. Jews have a special mission, I would discover as I began to study. Not the best mission, just a different one. I visited a lot of churches and synagogues. I did sort of maybe couch surfing. I did church and synagogue surfing. But I wasn't finding anything that really that drew me in. And then a friend of mine told me about a rabbi who meditated and was passionate about interfaith dialogue. And she thought I might like him. His name is Rabbi Ted Falcon. So I made an appointment to meet with him and told him about my spiritual struggles. I was Christian, my husband was Jewish. I was interested in Judaism, but I was not ready to give up on Jesus. At this time, I didn't have a very sophisticated idea of Jesus. Even when I converted to the Mormon church, I couldn't quite make sense of how I thought of him. I just knew what I saw and felt was good and moved towards it. So I talked with Rabbi Ted about this, and he said, What better way to learn about Jesus than to walk in the tradition he walked? You know, he said Jesus was Jewish. And I said, no, I didn't know that. I thought he was a Christian. I was interested, so I visited his synagogue and I fell in love. There were people there excited about what they were learning and practicing, and they loved their rabbi. I learned in Judaism that questioning was encouraged. Questioning anything was okay, and I love this because I have a lot of questions. It's a tradition based on works. You will know through righteous practice what is true. That sat well with me too. I could try things out. I didn't have to believe before I did anything. Practice brings wisdom. So some of the things I love about Judaism are the Hebrew language, the many meanings of the words, the way it sounds when you say a Jewish prayer or blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shehechiyanu v'kiyamanu v'higiyanu lazman hazeh. Blessed are you, Holy One of all being, who keeps us alive, sustains us, and brings us to this special moment in time. And there are blessings for everything, a way to remember to be grateful and stay conscious. One of the morning blessings you say upon first arriving is Moda ani lefanecha melechai v'kayam sheheki zarta binishmati b'hemla rabba emunatecha. Thank you, Holy One of all being. You return my soul within me with compassion. Abundant is your faithfulness. The idea is that your soul leaves your body at night and it travels around and learns new things. And if it arrives back in the morning and you wake up, God's given you another day. There's a blessing when you see a rainbow, when you see lightning, when you see the ocean for the first time in a while, when seeing beautiful people, when seeing ugly people or strange-looking people. And it goes on. I see the blessings as a practice to help me stay conscious to what I'm witnessing and to my connection in God, and that we're all connected. I also love the holidays that they're tied to the rhythms of the earth, and again, I'm reminded to stay connected and conscious. The Jewish rituals around passages are lovely. They do a really good job with death and dying. There's a whole year of support that's built in rituals to walk with someone through a year of grief, and they've done a good job with that. Also, bar and bat mitzvah rituals. I'm a family counselor, and adolescence is a really tough time, and lots of traditions have rites of passages for that time, and I think it's a really good idea, and I think they do a good job of it. Kids are given a Torah portion that's connected to the time that they were born, and the Torah is written all in Hebrew letters with no vowels, and so they have to learn how to read the Hebrew. They actually sing it, and then they give a little sermon about the meaning that it has to them. And family gathers around in community and celebrates the child in that awkward time and reminds family to come together and be close to their child in a time often when everyone's feeling awkward. Their sexuality is coming forward. They're not sure what to do with this child that's turning into an adult, and the child is often needs extra support at that time too. And then there's a toast that I love, I believe is Yiddish, but it's l'chaim, means to life. And when I was first studying Judaism and being involved in community and ritual, I just thought, oh my gosh, only the Jews. Not to a happy life, to a healthy life, to a lovely life, to a pretty life, just to life. And I thought, what? But over time, I came to love that toast as well, because I think it speaks to saying yes to everything, not just to the good things, that it all has meaning, the good and the bad. And when we can embrace it all and welcome it in, there's meaning. So Elie Wiesel wrote about Jacob's encounter with the angel. Jacob just understood a fundamental truth. God is in man, even in suffering, even in misfortune, even in evil. God is everywhere, in every being. God does not wait for man at the end of the road, the termination of exile. He accompanies him there. More than that, he is the road. He is the exile. God holds both ends of the rope He is present in every extremity. He is every limit. He is part of Jacob as he is part of Esau. So after about 12 years of marriage, I decided I wanted to claim Judaism as my own and went through a conversion process that included an intense year of study and then a conversion ceremony where I sat before a Beit Din, which are 3 rabbis, and their job is to ask you questions and make sure that you know what you're getting into, which is kind of hard to really know, but see if you know the prayers and the rituals and the holidays and some of the important basis of Judaism. And after that, there's a full immersion in the mikvah, which is a ritual Jewish bath. And that was followed by a blessing and a welcoming in. One of the rabbis, Rabbi David Wolfblank, brought his guitar and sang me a beautiful song that included these words from the book of Ruth, which you may be familiar with. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. This was touching to me at the time, first to be sang to, because except for my mom, and actually now Heather, that had never happened before, and it feels very personal to have someone sing to you. But also because he didn't say, my people will now be your people, as if you're now one of us. He said, your people will be my people. It felt like my conversion had changed him too, and it felt like a full inviting in. So from the Naked Now book that we've been reading in our study group, Richard Rohr defines conversion this way. Conversion is the experience by which one becomes an authentic human being. He says human beings attract other human beings to the same level of awareness by being fully alive. Well, I have to say, knowing that I was coming here to tell you about my at least 2 conversions, that gave me some comfort because it's a little hard to carry 2. Easier to say that I've been becoming more fully human. So things went along merrily for a while, but as time went on, my husband and I grew apart, and we decided to separate and eventually divorce. I went back to school and stopped going to synagogue, partly because there was no time. But also, actually, I was mad at God. How could things be falling apart like this when I've been trying so hard to do things right and keep our family together? After all this effort, really this is happening? I was living like I could control the outcomes in my life by trying to do what was right and good. I could actually control God, but I learned that perspective was not helpful. I was away from attending any religious services on a regular basis for about 13 years when Heather suggested we try out Salt House. So I want to turn back to the story we listened to about the doctor and the rabbi. The rabbi, who gets stronger as she receives the blood of many, is a powerful image. The welcoming of all, the soft, passive allowing of difference, how she welcomes it and attributes it to the light in her eyes. It is this kind of welcoming that I attribute to Jesus. I participate in communion because I want to accept the invitation with grace. All are welcome. To honor the invitation and participate in community with you in sacred ritual. I was touched by God and light and community in the Mormon Church, and it changed my life. I found them again, God, light, and community at Beit Aleph, Rabbi Ted's synagogue, and in the practices of Jewish religious traditions. Through Rabbi Ted's teaching, I also learned about a loving God, a God who cried when I cried, about love with a capital L. I was blessed with a rabbi who believes Jesus is about love. I didn't have to give him up when I became Jewish. He came along with me. Coming here to Salt House, the Judaism that I love, that I thought I might set aside, has actually come forward rather than receded, and I love that too. So I have one more short story to tell you. So it's Christmas Eve, 2017, and Heather wants to come to services at Salt House. And I don't really want to go, actually. We usually go to my brother Glenn's house. The whole family gathers there, and that's kind of one of our traditions. But I decided I need to be a good wife and be supportive, and I'm going to go with Heather, and there's plenty of time to still go to Glenn's after. And so we decided to go to services. So we live about 7 minutes away, and we're rushing around trying to get ready. What food are we bringing to Glenn's? How do we, we're going to head off to church and meet Casey at the house. And so we rush out in a hurry. Just before we turn the corner to Salt House, our windshield is hit with snow. Not just a few flakes. It's like I've never seen before. Usually they just trickle down, but this time it was like we entered a different realm. 1 second the windshield was dry, and the next it was covered with snow. I slowed down because it was so surprising, and I tell Heather, we've just entered Christmas Eve. So at services, I'm feeling the love all night. And if you didn't go, you missed out. It was a really awesome service. It was beautiful. Oh my gosh. So I'm feeling all the love. And then during the Silent Night experience, I think, oh my gosh, this is it. I remember this is how it feels to belong to a community of light and love. All the times it was hard to come. We wondered what we were doing here, and if we'd find our place. We're different, we're old, gay, Jewish, nothing, and everything. I'm grateful for the blessing of this community, for the wrestling it calls forth in me, and especially for the light and how I find it here. Thank you.